the hidden force that controls everything you do. There's something happening inside your brain right now that you're completely unaware of. While you're reading these words, an invisible force is making decisions for you, shaping your emotions, and determining whether you'll finish this content or click away in the next 30 seconds. This force has been running your life since the day you were born. It decides who you fall in love with. It determines how much money you'll make. It controls whether you'll succeed or fail at virtually everything you attempt. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people will live their entire lives without ever discovering what this force is, let alone learning how to master it. I spent years studying the works of Henry T. Hamblin, a businessman who lost everything in the early 1900s and then rebuilt his life using principles that seemed almost magical to his contemporaries. What he discovered about the human mind has been validated by modern neuroscience, yet remains largely unknown to the general public. Today I want to share with you not just what Hamblin discovered, but how you can apply these principles immediately. Because understanding this hidden force isn't just interesting, it's the difference between living a life of quiet desperation and living a life of genuine power. Let me start with a story that might seem unrelated, but stay with me. In 1985, a janitor named Richard Montañez was working at a Frito-Lay plant in California. He had no formal education. He couldn't read or write very well. By every conventional measure, he was destined to remain invisible, sweeping floors until retirement. One day, a machine broke down on the production line. Cheetos were coming out without their signature cheese dust coating. Most workers would have simply reported the malfunction and waited for someone else to fix it. But something different happened in Richard's mind. He took some of those plain Cheetos home. He remembered the elote, the grilled corn with chili and lime, that street vendors sold in his neighborhood. He coated the Cheetos with chili powder and spices. He tasted them. Something clicked. What happened next defies everything we think we know about corporate hierarchy and social mobility. Richard called the CEO of Frito-Lay directly, not his supervisor, not the plant manager, the CEO. Most people would never make that call. The invisible force inside them would generate 1,000 reasons why it's a bad idea. You're just a janitor. They'll fire you for going over everyone's heads. Who do you think you are? You don't have an MBA. You don't know anything about product development. But Richard's invisible force was calibrated differently. He got a meeting. He showed up in a three-piece suit he'd bought specifically for the occasion. He presented his idea with handmade charts and samples. That janitor invented Flamin' Hot Cheetos, one of the most successful snack products in history. He eventually became an executive at PepsiCo, traveling the world as a motivational speaker and consultant. Now here's the question that matters. What was different about Richard Montañez? Was he smarter than other janitors? Did he have some genetic advantage? Did the universe simply favor him? The answer lies in understanding the force that Hamblin spent his life studying, the force that modern scientists call the subconscious mind, but which operates in ways far more complex than that simple label suggests. Your invisible operating system. Think of your conscious mind as the tip of an iceberg. It's the part you're aware of, the internal voice reading these words, the thoughts you can observe, the decisions you believe you're making deliberately. Beneath the surface lies something vastly larger. This underwater portion of the iceberg contains your beliefs, your automatic responses, your deepest fears, your hidden assumptions about what's possible and what isn't. It holds every experience you've ever had, every message you've absorbed from your parents, your teachers, your culture. This subconscious realm doesn't think in words. It thinks in patterns, images, and emotions. It doesn't distinguish between what's actually happening and what you vividly imagine. It can't tell the difference between a real threat and a perceived one. And here's the crucial point. The subconscious mind controls approximately 95% of your daily behavior. You're not consciously deciding to breathe right now. You're not deliberately commanding your heart to beat. But beyond these biological functions, your subconscious is also controlling far more of your chosen actions than you realize. When you reach for a snack, it's usually not a conscious decision. When you check your phone for the 15th time this hour, you're running a program. When you procrastinate on an important project, when you sabotage a relationship just as it's getting good, when you can't seem to break through a certain income level no matter how hard you try, all of these behaviors originate in the underwater portion of your iceberg. Richard Montañez didn't have fewer limiting beliefs than other janitors. He simply had different programming around what was possible for someone like him. Somewhere in his underwater iceberg, there was a pattern that said, I can create value. I can approach powerful people. My ideas matter. Most people carry very different patterns. Their underwater programming says, Stay in your lane. Don't draw attention to yourself. People like us don't do things like that. These patterns aren't genetic. They're not permanent. They were installed, which means they can be uninstalled and replaced. But here's where it gets interesting. You can't change your subconscious programming through willpower alone. You can't simply decide to believe different things. The subconscious doesn't respond to force. It responds to repetition, emotion, and most importantly, to the state of consciousness you're operating from. The two modes of being Hamblin identified something that modern psychologists have confirmed. Humans operate from one of two fundamental modes at any given moment. The first mode he called the consciousness of limitation. When you're operating from this mode, you perceive the world through a lens of scarcity. There's not enough money, not enough time, not enough opportunities, not enough love. You feel separate from others, from life itself, from any source of power greater than your struggling individual self. In this state, your subconscious mind generates protective behaviors. It tells you to hoard what you have, to distrust others, to avoid risks, to stay small. These behaviors make perfect sense from a survival perspective. If resources are truly scarce and threats are everywhere, then caution and self-protection are rational strategies. The problem is that this mode becomes self-fulfilling. When you operate from limitation, you unconsciously push away opportunities. You fail to see possibilities that are right in front of you. You interpret neutral events as threatening. You make decisions based on fear rather than vision. People in this mode often work incredibly hard but seem to hit invisible ceilings. They might succeed in one area of life while everything else falls apart. They attract situations and relationships that confirm their underlying belief in scarcity. The second mode Hamblin called the consciousness of abundance. This isn't naive optimism or positive thinking in the superficial sense. It's a fundamental recognition of certain facts about reality. The universe, at its core, is creative rather than destructive. Life wants to grow, expand, and express itself in ever more complex and beautiful forms. There is an invisible order underlying the apparent chaos of existence. And human beings, as expressions of this creative life force, have access to resources far beyond what the rational mind can perceive. When you operate from this mode, everything changes, not because you're ignoring reality, but because you're perceiving a deeper reality that was always there but invisible to the fearful mind. In the abundance mode, your subconscious relaxes its protective mechanisms. It allows you to see opportunities. It generates creative ideas instead of defensive reactions. It attracts people and circumstances aligned with growth rather than survival. Now you might be thinking, this sounds nice, but how do I actually shift from one mode to the other? This is where most self-help teachings fail. They tell you to think positively, to visualize success, to repeat affirmations. And while these practices aren't useless, they often don't work because they're trying to change surface symptoms without addressing the underlying cause. The shift from limitation to abundance isn't primarily a mental exercise. It's a shift in your entire being, your body, your emotions, your relationship to something larger than yourself. Let me explain how this works in practice. The physiology of transformation. In 2012, researchers at Harvard discovered something remarkable. They asked subjects to hold one of two postures for just 2 minutes. The first group held power poses, expansive positions with open chests and raised arms. The second group held low power poses, contracted positions with crossed arms and hunched shoulders. After just 2 minutes, the researchers measured hormone levels. The power pose group showed a 20% increase in testosterone and a 25% decrease in cortisol. The low power group showed the opposite pattern, lower testosterone and higher cortisol. Think about what this means. Your body position, something you can change right now in this moment, directly affects your biochemistry, and your biochemistry directly affects your thoughts, your emotions, and your behavior. This isn't new age speculation. This is measurable, repeatable science. Hamblin understood this principle a century before it was scientifically validated. He knew that the path to changing your consciousness runs through the body, not around it. When you're operating from limitation, your body reflects it. Your breathing is shallow, your shoulders are tense, your jaw is clenched, your gaze is narrow and worried. These physical patterns aren't just symptoms of fearful thinking, they're causes of it. The relationship is bidirectional. Change the body, and you change the mind. This is why every genuine spiritual tradition includes physical practices. Yoga, Tai Chi, breathing exercises, prostrations, dance. These aren't arbitrary rituals. They're technologies for shifting the physical substrate of consciousness. But here's what most people miss. You don't need to spend years mastering complex practices. The shift can begin immediately with the simplest possible intervention. Right now, as you're reading this, notice your breathing. Is it shallow or deep? Is it rushed or relaxed? Take a breath that fills your entire belly. Let it expand your lower back. Hold it for a moment, then release it completely, letting your shoulders drop. Do this 3 times. Notice what happens. Your thinking probably slowed down slightly. Some of the background tension you weren't even aware of might have released. Your field of vision may have widened imperceptibly. This is the beginning of the shift from limitation to abundance. It's not about forcing yourself to think positive thoughts. It's about changing the physiological conditions that make positive thoughts possible. When your body is in a state of chronic contraction, which is the state most people live in without realizing it, positive thinking is almost impossible. The biochemistry of stress overrides whatever affirmations you're trying to repeat. But when your body relaxes, when your breathing deepens, when your nervous system shifts from sympathetic activation to parasympathetic calm, then and only then does the subconscious mind become receptive to new patterns. This is why Hamblin placed such emphasis on what he called the silence, daily periods of deliberate relaxation and inner stillness. Not because stillness is virtuous, but because it creates the physiological conditions necessary for transformation. Let me be specific about how this works in daily life. The morning practice. Most people begin their day in reaction mode. The alarm goes off and immediately they're thinking about everything they have to do. They check their phone before their feet hit the floor, absorbing other people's priorities and the world's anxieties before they've even established their own presence. This approach to waking guarantees that you'll operate from limitation for most of the day. You've activated your stress response before you've even brushed your teeth. Your subconscious mind has received the message, life is overwhelming. You're already behind. You'd better hurry. Hamblin suggested a radically different approach, one that might seem impossibly luxurious to modern sensibilities, but actually requires very little time. When you first wake up, before you move, before you open your eyes, take a few moments to simply be. Feel the weight of your body on the bed. Notice the sensation of breathing. Don't try to think about anything in particular. Just exist. Then with your eyes still closed, deliberately call to mind something you're genuinely grateful for. Not a forced gratitude, not I should be grateful for running water, but something that actually produces a feeling of appreciation in your body. Maybe it's a person you love. Maybe it's a memory that makes you smile. Maybe it's anticipation of something good that might happen today. Stay with this feeling for even 30 seconds. Let it spread through your chest. Let it soften your face. This simple practice accomplishes something profound. It starts your day in the abundance mode rather than the limitation mode. Your subconscious mind receives a different message. Life is good. I have more than enough. Today is an opportunity, not a threat. From this state, your entire day unfolds differently. You make different decisions. You notice different opportunities. You respond to challenges with creativity rather than reactivity. I know how this sounds. Too simple. How could a few moments of morning stillness and gratitude possibly transform your life? The answer has to do with how habits compound over time and with how profoundly your initial state affects everything that follows. The compounding effect. There's a famous study about judges and parole decisions. Researchers analyzed thousands of rulings and found something disturbing. The single biggest predictor of whether a prisoner would be granted parole wasn't the severity of their crime, their behavior in prison, or any other legally relevant factor. It was the time of day. Judges granted parole about 65% of the time right after breakfast or lunch. By the end of each session, before the next break, approval rates dropped to nearly zero. Think about the implications. These are trained legal professionals making life-altering decisions with full awareness of their responsibility to be fair. And yet their judgments were being driven largely by their blood sugar levels and mental fatigue. This is how much our physical and mental state affects our decisions. Now extrapolate this across your entire life. If you begin each day depleted and reactive, you'll make thousands of subtly worse decisions over weeks and months and years. You'll be harsher with your loved ones. You'll miss opportunities because you're too stressed to see them. You'll choose short-term comfort over long-term growth because your exhausted mind can't hold the bigger picture. Conversely, if you begin each day from a place of groundedness and abundance, those thousands of decisions shift in the other direction. You're more patient, you're more creative, you're more likely to take intelligent risks, you're more attractive to other people because you're not radiating desperation. This is how small practices compound into large transformations. not through some mystical mechanism, but through the accumulated effect of slightly better decisions, slightly improved relationships, slightly bolder actions, all flowing from a fundamentally different starting state. But morning practice is just the beginning. The real mastery lies in what you do with the rest of your day, the challenge of maintenance. Here's the honest truth that most self-improvement teaching glosses over. It's relatively easy to feel good during a meditation or a workshop or while reading an inspiring book. The challenge is maintaining that state when life starts happening. Your boss criticizes your work. Your partner says something that triggers an old wound. The traffic makes you late for an important meeting. Your child has a meltdown at the worst possible moment. In these moments, all your morning equanimity can evaporate in seconds. Your nervous system kicks into threat response. Your subconscious mind activates old patterns of defensiveness, anger, or despair. This is normal. This is human. And anyone who tells you they permanently transcended this reactivity is either lying or deluded. The goal isn't to eliminate reactive responses. The goal is to shorten the time between reaction and recovery and to gradually reduce the intensity of reactions over time. Hamblin called this maintaining consciousness in the midst of activity. Modern psychology might call it emotional regulation or stress resilience. Whatever we name it, this capacity is the key to applying spiritual principles in real life. Here's a specific technique that I've found remarkably effective. The noticing practice. Whenever you feel yourself shifting into limitation, whenever you notice stress, anxiety, frustration, or fear arising, instead of trying to suppress the feeling or immediately acting on it, simply name it internally. I notice I'm feeling frustrated. I notice fear is arising. I notice my jaw is clenching. This simple act of noticing creates a slight separation between you and the experience. You're no longer completely lost in the emotion. Part of you is observing. This observing part is what Hamlin would call your true self, the consciousness behind your thoughts and feelings, the witnessing awareness that remains constant even as mental states come and go. From this slightly detached position, you have choices that don't exist when you're completely merged with your reaction. You can take a breath. You can adjust your posture. You can ask yourself what response would serve your highest good rather than automatically following the habitual pattern. This doesn't mean you suppress or deny the emotion. You feel it fully. You just don't let it dictate your behavior. Over time, this practice literally rewires your brain. The neural pathways that connect triggering events to automatic reactions grow weaker from disuse. New pathways form, connecting those same triggers to more conscious responses. Neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. Hamblin would have called it the training of the mind. Whatever the terminology, the mechanism is real and the results are measurable. But there's an even deeper level to this work, one that Hamblin considered essential and that most modern approaches neglect entirely. The question of power source. Everything we've discussed so far could be understood in purely psychological terms. Train your subconscious through physical practices and mental disciplines. Develop emotional regulation through the noticing technique. Compound small improvements into large transformations through daily consistency. This psychological approach works to a degree. Many people have changed their lives using nothing more than these techniques, but Hamblin insisted that something crucial is missing from a purely self-help approach. He believed that human beings, operating solely from their own finite resources, can only achieve limited transformation. True power, the kind that can lift you from the deepest despair and carry you through the fiercest challenges, comes from connection to something greater. Now, this is where many modern readers become skeptical. We're trained to be suspicious of religious language, to dismiss talk of God or spirit or universal mind as unscientific superstition. I want to suggest a different way of understanding what Hamblin meant. Consider the following phenomenon, which has been documented repeatedly in psychological research. People who believe in some greater purpose or meaning to life, whether they conceptualize it religiously or philosophically, demonstrate measurably better outcomes across almost every dimension of well-being. They live longer. They recover faster from illness and trauma. They cope better with loss. They report higher life satisfaction. They're less likely to suffer from depression and anxiety. This isn't because they're avoiding reality through wishful thinking. Many of these people hold sophisticated, nuanced beliefs that fully acknowledge life's suffering and uncertainty, but their conviction that existence has meaning, that they're part of something larger than their individual selves, provides a psychological anchor that pure self-reliance cannot match. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Auschwitz and wrote Man's Search for Meaning, observed this directly. The prisoners who survived the concentration camps weren't necessarily the physically strongest. They were the ones who maintained connection to purpose. Whether that purpose was religious faith, love for family, or commitment to some future work they felt called to complete. What Hamblin called unity with the infinite can be understood as this sense of connection to something larger. It doesn't require believing in a bearded deity sitting on a cloud. It requires recognizing that your individual consciousness is not all there is, that you participate in a larger wholeness that supports and sustains you. This recognition changes everything. When you operate solely from the finite self, your resources are limited. You have only so much willpower, only so much energy, only so much capacity to endure. Eventually, in the face of sufficient challenge, the finite self runs out of fuel and collapses. But when you're connected to something larger, you have access to reserves that aren't stored in your personal tank. Hamlin described this as plugging in to a universal power source. Modern researchers might explain it in terms of social support, meaning-making, or transcendent states of consciousness. The mechanism matters less than the result. How do you establish this connection if you're not traditionally religious? How do you access something beyond the finite self without abandoning intellectual honesty? The practice of surrender. There's a word that makes modern people uncomfortable. Surrender. We associate it with weakness, with giving up, with losing a battle. But Hamblin used this word to describe something quite different. Not the surrender of the defeated, but the surrender of the wise. Think about what happens when you're learning to swim. If you panic and flail, you sink. The more you fight the water, the more it defeats you. But if you relax, if you trust that the water will support you, you float. Your very willingness to stop fighting allows you to be held. This is surrender in Hamblin's sense. It's not giving up on life. It's giving up the exhausting pretense that you're entirely in control, that you can force outcomes through sheer effort of will. In practical terms, this surrender might look like this. You're facing a problem that seems impossible. You've analyzed it from every angle, tried every solution you can think of, worried about it until you're exhausted. Nothing is working. In this moment, instead of redoubling your mental effort, you consciously release the problem. You might say internally, I've done everything I know how to do. I release this to a wisdom greater than my own. I trust that the solution will come. Then you genuinely let it go. You turn your attention to something else. You go for a walk. You play with your children. You rest. What often happens next seems almost magical. The solution appears, seemingly out of nowhere. You wake up with an insight. A chance conversation provides the missing piece. An opportunity emerges that you couldn't have manufactured through effort. Is this supernatural? Is it evidence of divine intervention? You could explain it entirely in psychological terms. When you release conscious grip on a problem, you allow your subconscious mind to work on it. The subconscious processes far more information than conscious awareness can handle, making connections and seeing patterns that deliberate thought misses. By relaxing your stressed mental state, you become capable of perceiving solutions that were always there, but invisible to your anxious scanning. Or you could explain it in terms of confirmation bias and selective attention. Perhaps you're simply noticing opportunities that were present all along, but that your worried mind was filtering out. Either way, the practical result is the same. The act of surrender, of releasing the need to control, produces results that striving cannot achieve. This is the paradox at the heart of Hamblin's teaching. Maximum power comes through maximum surrender. Not surrender to circumstances, not surrender to other people's agendas, but surrender to the deep intelligence that operates through you when you stop interfering with it. The shadow side, I've painted a largely positive picture so far, but I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't address the shadow side of this work. First, there's the danger of spiritual bypass. This is using spiritual concepts to avoid dealing with real psychological wounds and practical problems. Someone might read about releasing to a higher power and use it as an excuse to avoid taking necessary action. They sit in meditation while their bills go unpaid, telling themselves they're trusting the universe to provide. This is a misunderstanding of everything Hamblin taught. Surrender doesn't mean passivity. It doesn't mean ignoring practical reality. It means bringing your best effort and then releasing attachment to specific outcomes. It means acting wisely and then trusting the results. Hamblin was a businessman. He knew that spiritual principles don't exempt you from the need to show up, do the work, meet your obligations, and operate with integrity in the material world. The spiritual and practical aren't opposites. They're partners. Second, there's the danger of magical thinking. This is the belief that mental states alone, without corresponding action, can change external reality. Some modern distortions of these ideas suggest that you can visualize wealth into existence, that the right affirmations will cure disease, that maintaining positive thoughts will protect you from all harm. This is wishful thinking dressed up in spiritual language. It's not what Hamblin taught. Yes, your mental state affects your outcomes, but it does so through mechanisms that include action and behavior. Your abundant consciousness leads you to see opportunities which you then pursue through effort. Your fearful consciousness causes you to miss opportunities and make poor decisions, leading to worse outcomes. The link between mind and circumstance runs through your actions, your relationships, your daily choices. It's not a mystical beam that projects your wishes onto reality while you sit passively. Third, there's the danger of self-blame. If you believe that all your circumstances are created by your consciousness, then every misfortune becomes your fault. Lost your job? Must have had a poverty consciousness. Diagnosed with cancer? Must have harbored negative thoughts. Relationships failing? Must be sending out the wrong energy. This kind of thinking is cruel, especially when applied to genuine tragedy. It also doesn't match reality. Bad things happen to people with wonderful consciousness. Terrible people sometimes enjoy great worldly success. The relationship between inner state and outer circumstance is real, but it's probabilistic rather than deterministic. A good mindset improves your odds. It doesn't guarantee specific outcomes, and many factors beyond your consciousness, economics, genetics, chance, the choices of other people, affect what happens in your life. Hamlin was clear on this point. He spoke of destiny, of karma, of the long-term consequences of past actions that must play out regardless of present consciousness. He didn't promise that right thinking would make you immune to all suffering. He promised that right thinking would help you face and transcend whatever suffering life brings. The paradox of goals. There's another subtlety that's easy to miss. Most people come to this teaching because they want something. They want more money, better relationships, improved health, greater success. They see consciousness work as a tool for getting what they want. There's nothing wrong with wanting things. Goals and ambitions are natural expressions of life energy. But if your spiritual practice is entirely subordinated to material goals, something essential gets lost. Hamblin would say that the truly transformative move is not learning to use consciousness to get what you want. It's allowing consciousness work to change what you want. As you develop the capacity to operate from abundance rather than scarcity, as you experience the peace that comes from connection to something larger, as you taste the joy of surrender and the power of released effort, your desires naturally evolve. You stop wanting as much that's driven by fear, the accumulation born of insecurity, the achievement motivated by need for approval, the relationships sought out of loneliness and desperation. You start wanting things that emerge from fullness, creative expression for its own sake, contribution that serves others, relationships based on genuine appreciation rather than need. This shift is gradual and organic. You can't force it by pretending not to want what you actually want. You can't skip ahead to enlightened desires through willpower. But if you commit to the practice, if you keep coming back to the work of shifting consciousness, your wanting naturally purifies itself. And here's the paradox. Goals you pursue from fullness are far more likely to be achieved than goals you chase from desperation. The universe seems to support endeavors that don't need to succeed. It resists clutching and grasping. This is why some people seem to get everything easily while others struggle for every inch. It's not that some are more talented or more deserving. It's that some are operating from a state that attracts, while others operate from a state that repels. The three obstacles. In my observation, three main obstacles prevent people from applying these principles consistently. The first is impatience. People try the practices for a few days or weeks, don't see dramatic results, and conclude they don't work. But consciousness change is like physical fitness. It develops gradually through sustained effort. You wouldn't expect six-pack abs from a week at the gym. Why expect transformed consciousness from a week of practice? The genuine shifts happen over months and years. The daily practice might feel uneventful, even boring. Results accumulate so slowly that they're hard to perceive. Only by looking back over significant time periods can you see how much has changed. If you're looking for instant transformation, this is not the path for you. There are no shortcuts. Anyone promising rapid enlightenment is selling something, not teaching truth. The second obstacle is inconsistency. People practice intensely for a period, experience real benefits, and then let the practice slide. Life gets busy. Old habits reassert themselves. Before long, they're back to where they started, wondering why they can't sustain change. The solution is to make practice non-negotiable, like brushing your teeth. You don't skip brushing because you're busy, or don't feel like it. You don't need to feel motivated. It's simply what you do. This might mean committing to a minimum that's so small you can do it regardless of circumstances. 5 minutes of morning stillness, one conscious breath every hour, a single moment of gratitude before bed. Better to do something tiny consistently than something ambitious sporadically. The third obstacle is isolation. Personal transformation is very difficult to sustain alone. We're social creatures, constantly influenced by the consciousness of those around us. If everyone in your environment operates from scarcity and fear, their state will pull you toward their level. This doesn't mean you need to abandon your current relationships or surround yourself only with enlightened masters. It means you need some support, some connection with others who are walking a similar path. This might be a formal group, a teacher, or just a few friends who take inner work seriously. What matters is having mirrors who can reflect your growth back to you, remind you of your commitments when you forget, and share the journey so you don't feel crazy for prioritizing invisible development, from personal to collective. Up to this point, we've focused on individual transformation, but Hamblin was clear that personal development is not the ultimate goal. It's a preparation for service. As you stabilize in abundance consciousness, as you learn to access power beyond your finite self, as you develop the capacity to face challenges without losing your center, you become capable of contributing to the world in ways that weren't possible before. This isn't about becoming a professional spiritual teacher or starting a nonprofit. It might be as simple as being fully present with the person in front of you instead of distracted by your own anxieties. It might mean doing your existing job with greater creativity and care. It might mean showing up for your family and community with patience you didn't have before. Every person operating from abundance is a stabilizing influence on the collective field. Every person who has transformed scarcity into fullness is living proof that change is possible. We're in a time when this matters enormously. The challenges facing humanity, climate crisis, political polarization, technological disruption, mental health epidemics, are not amenable to solutions from scarcity consciousness. They require the creativity, courage, and collaborative capacity that only arise from a fundamentally different state of being. You might think your personal practice has nothing to do with these global challenges, but consciousness is contagious. How you show up affects everyone you contact, who in turn affect everyone they contact. The ripples spread further than you can trace. This is not a metaphor. Research on social networks shows that emotional states spread through up to 3 degrees of separation. Your friend's friend's friend is measurably affected by your happiness or unhappiness. So your morning practice, your noticing technique, your moments of surrender, your gradual shift from limitation to abundance, these are not just personal indulgences. They're contributions to a field that affects everyone. The long game. I want to close with a perspective that might seem strange in our instant gratification culture. Hamblin believed that consciousness work is the essential project of a human lifetime, not something you do for a few months until you feel better, not a technique you apply to fix a specific problem, but an ongoing refinement that continues until your last breath. From this view, it doesn't matter how quickly you progress. What matters is that you stay on the path. A slow, steady practitioner who keeps going for decades will far outpace someone who burns bright and then quits. This means making peace with imperfection. You won't always practice. You'll fall back into old patterns repeatedly. You'll have periods of doubt when the whole enterprise seems pointless. This is all part of the journey. The failures and setbacks are not evidence that you're doing it wrong. They're the raw material from which wisdom is forged. Hamblin himself went through periods of profound despair and confusion. He lost his health, his business, his certainty. He wasn't someone born enlightened who never struggled. He was a normal human who found a path through his struggles and spent the rest of his life mapping that path for others. His message, finally, is one of profound hope. Not the shallow hope that bad things won't happen, but the deep hope that comes from knowing you have access to power sufficient for any circumstance, that you're not alone in the universe, that the essential nature of reality is on your side. This hope is not a belief you adopt because it feels good. It's a recognition that arises from direct experience. As you practice, as you taste the reality of abundance, consciousness even briefly, you come to know that it's true. Not because a book told you, because you've lived it. And once you know it, really know it in your bones, everything changes. Not the external circumstances of your life, at least not immediately, but your relationship to those circumstances, your capacity to face them with grace, your freedom to respond rather than react. This is what Hamlin called the hidden power. Not magic, not wishful thinking, but a very real capacity available to anyone willing to do the work of cultivating it. The force buried within you has the capacity to lift you higher. This is not poetry. This is a description of a mechanism that awaits only your attention to begin operating. May you find that force. May you learn to wield it wisely. And may your life become what it was always meant to be, an expression of the infinite through the finite, a gift to the world, an adventure worthy of your singular existence. The mechanism of thought. Let me go deeper into something I touched on earlier, because it's foundational to everything else. Your thoughts are not private events that happen only inside your skull. They are creative forces that shape both your inner experience and your outer circumstances. This claim sounds mystical, but it can be understood practically. When you hold a thought repeatedly, several things happen simultaneously. Neurologically, you strengthen the neural pathways associated with the thought. Emotionally, you generate feelings that correspond to the thought content. Physically, your body responds with subtle tensions or relaxations, hormone releases, and changes in posture and breathing. These internal changes then affect your behavior in ways mostly invisible to you. A person thinking thoughts of inadequacy carries themselves differently than a person thinking thoughts of confidence. This difference in carriage is perceived by others, who respond accordingly. The inadequate feeling person receives responses that confirm their inadequacy. The confident feeling person receives responses that confirm their worth. Additionally, your thought state affects your perception. You literally see different things depending on what you're thinking. The anxious person notices threats everywhere. The grateful person notices beauty everywhere. Same objective environment, different subjective experience. Put all this together and you have a complete feedback loop. Thoughts generate feelings, physical states, behaviors, and perceptions. These all interact with the external world, producing results. Those results get fed back through perception, confirming and strengthening the original thoughts. This is why negative spirals are so hard to escape. Once you're caught in a pattern of fearful thinking, everything conspires to prove that fear is justified. And it's why positive shifts can seem miraculous. Once you break out of the negative loop and establish a positive one, things that seemed impossible start happening. Hamblin understood this mechanism in principle, even without modern neuroscience to spell it out. He knew that changing your life starts with changing your thoughts, but that changing your thoughts by force of will is nearly impossible. The solution lies in changing the underlying conditions from which thoughts arise. We've already discussed some of these conditions: physical state, morning practice, the noticing technique, connection to something larger than yourself. But there's another element that deserves extended attention: the environment of mind. Just as your body is affected by the physical environment, the air you breathe, the water you drink, the food you eat, your mind is affected by what we might call its environment. This mental environment includes the information you consume, the people you spend time with, the physical spaces you inhabit, and the activities you engage in. Most people put far more thought into their physical diet than their mental diet. They might carefully choose organic produce while indiscriminately consuming hours of outrage-inducing news, anxiety-amplifying social media, and mind-numbing entertainment. This makes no sense if you understand how the mind works. The inputs you feed your mind shape the outputs it generates. If you spend hours consuming fear and conflict, your mind will produce fearful, conflictual thoughts. If you fill your mind with inspiration, wisdom, and beauty, your thoughts will trend in those directions. This isn't about becoming a hermit or avoiding all difficult information. It's about conscious curation. What are you choosing to put in your mind, and why? Consider your media consumption. When you watch the news, what state does it put you in? Does it inform you in ways that empower action, or does it just stimulate anxiety and helplessness? When you scroll social media, how do you feel afterward? More connected and inspired, or more depleted and comparing yourself unfavorably to curated highlight reels? Consider your relationships. Who do you spend time with regularly? Do they lift you up or pull you down? Do they support your growth or subtly undermine it? This doesn't mean cutting out everyone who isn't perfectly evolved. It means being honest about the effects different relationships have on your state and making conscious choices about where to invest your limited relational energy. Consider your physical spaces. What is your home environment like? Your workspace? Do these spaces support the state of consciousness you're trying to cultivate? Or are they cluttered, stressful, ugly in ways that drag on your well-being? Consider how you spend your time. What activities fill your days? Do they engage your higher capacities or just fill hours? Do they leave you energized or depleted? None of this requires radical change overnight, but it does require honest assessment and gradual optimization. Small changes in mental environment compound over time, just like small changes in practice. The practice of visualization. Among the specific techniques for working with thought, visualization holds a special place in Hamlin's teaching. Visualization is not just idle daydreaming. It's a deliberate practice of holding specific images in mind with focus and feeling. The subconscious mind, as noted earlier, doesn't distinguish well between real and vividly imagined experience. When you visualize something with enough intensity and emotional involvement, your subconscious responds as if it were actually happening. This is why elite athletes use visualization as part of their training. Studies show that mental practice activates many of the same neural pathways as physical practice. A basketball player who visualizes shooting free throws will improve their actual shooting percentage, even without physical practice. The principle extends beyond athletics. Whatever you visualize repeatedly, with feeling, begins to feel normal and possible. Your subconscious starts working to align reality with the mental image. You begin noticing opportunities aligned with your vision. Your behavior shifts in subtle ways that move you toward what you're imaging. But there's an art to effective visualization that goes beyond simply imagining what you want. First, the visualization must be genuinely felt, not just thought. If you imagine wealth while feeling impoverished, the feeling wins. The subconscious responds to emotional charge, not intellectual content. So you need to find a way to actually feel the reality of what you're visualizing to generate in your body the emotions that would accompany that reality. Second, the visualization should be detailed and sensory. Vague images have less impact than specific, vivid ones. Don't just imagine being successful. Imagine what exactly that looks like, where you are, what you're wearing, what you're doing, who's with you, what sounds you hear, what textures you feel. Third, the visualization should be repeated regularly. A single session has minimal effect. It's the daily repetition that gradually reshapes the subconscious patterns. This is not a quick fix, but a patient cultivation. Fourth, the visualization must be accompanied by appropriate action. This is crucial and often overlooked. Visualization is not a replacement for effort. It's a complement to effort. It helps align your subconscious with your conscious goals, making your efforts more effective. But the efforts still need to be made. Let me give a concrete example of how this might look in practice. Suppose you want to transition into a new career. You have a vision of what this career looks like, but it seems distant and improbable from where you currently stand. Each morning, as part of your practice, you spend a few minutes visualizing yourself in this new career. You don't just think about it abstractly. You place yourself in a specific scene. You're at your desk. What does it look like? Working on a project. What exactly? Feeling engaged and alive. Feel this in your body now, knowing you're contributing something meaningful. Let this purpose warm your chest. As you visualize, you notice any resistance that arises. The inner voice that says, "Who are you kidding?" Or, "This will never happen." You don't argue with this voice. You notice it, acknowledge it, and return to the visualization. Over time, the resistance weakens as the new image becomes more familiar. Meanwhile, in your daily life, you take actions aligned with this vision. You might research the new field, develop relevant skills, make contacts, apply for positions. The visualization doesn't replace this action. It fuels and guides it. Because you've spent time in the future reality, you're more motivated to do what's necessary to get there. And your subconscious is more attuned to opportunities that might help. This combination of visualization and action is far more powerful than either alone. The visualization without action becomes escapist fantasy. The action without visualization becomes grinding effort, unsupported by inspiration. The transmutation of desire. There's a dimension of Hamlin's teaching that might seem puritanical to modern ears, but which contains practical wisdom worth understanding. He wrote extensively about what he called the transmutation of lower desires into higher purposes. By lower desires, he meant impulses rooted in the body and the survival instincts, particularly sexual desire, but also appetites for food, comfort, stimulation, and dominance. By higher purposes, he meant creative expression, intellectual pursuit, artistic achievement, and spiritual realization. Hamlin did not suggest that lower desires are evil or should be suppressed. He knew that suppression creates more problems than it solves. The energy that powers these desires is fundamentally life energy, which is neutral and necessary. What he proposed was redirection. The same energy that drives sexual obsession can drive creative genius. The same force that fuels gluttony can fuel productive work. The same power that seeks dominance over others can achieve mastery over oneself. How does this transmutation happen? It begins with attention. Energy flows where attention goes. If your attention is constantly captured by sexual imagery, food, or other sensory stimulation, your energy moves in those directions. But if you deliberately redirect attention toward creative projects, learning, or service, the energy follows. This is not about forcing yourself to stop wanting what you want. It's about developing alternative interests that are genuinely compelling. As these interests develop, they naturally draw energy away from lower outlets. It also involves physical practices. Sexual energy in particular is closely tied to physical states. Practices like exercise, deep breathing, and certain yogic techniques can help channel this energy toward different ends. Hamblin didn't go into detail about specific techniques, perhaps because of the prudery of his era, but modern understanding of Kundalini and Tantric practices offers more specific guidance for those interested. The point is not to become an ascetic who renounces all pleasure. The point is to not be a slave to impulse, to have genuine choice about where your energy goes. Most people are unconsciously controlled by their desires, lurching from craving to satisfaction, to craving without ever stepping back to ask if this is how they want to live. True power comes from being able to say yes to desires, consciously chosen, and no to desires that would scatter your force. There's a practical benefit to this transmutation beyond morality. When your energy is dispersed in constant pursuit of stimulation, you have little left for creating anything of value. But when you learn to contain and direct your energy, you become capable of sustained focus and effort that produces real results. This is why so many great creative achievements have come from people who were notably non-indulgent, not because deprivation is virtuous, but because they learned to channel their vital force into their work instead of dissipating it in distraction. The economics of attention, closely related to the transmutation of desire, is what we might call the economics of attention. Attention is your most precious resource, more precious than money, because you can always make more money, but you can never recover spent time. More precious than energy, because attention determines where energy goes. What you attend to grows, what you ignore withers. This is true both externally and internally. If you attend to problems, problems proliferate. If you attend to opportunities, opportunities multiply. If you attend to your fears, they strengthen. If you attend to your strengths, they develop. Most people spend their attention randomly without realizing what they're doing. They attend to whatever is loudest, most alarming, or most stimulating. Their attention is constantly being hijacked by news designed to trigger outrage, by social media engineered for addiction, by advertising crafted to exploit insecurity, by their own undisciplined mental chatter. This scattered attention is disastrous for consciousness development. You cannot shift from limitation to abundance if your attention is constantly being pulled into limitation by every passing stimulus. Guarding your attention is therefore essential. This means becoming selective about what you expose yourself to, as we discussed with mental environment. But it also means developing the internal capacity to direct attention where you choose. This is fundamentally what meditation practices develop. When you meditate, you're practicing attentional control. You notice when attention wanders, you gently return it to your chosen focus. And through repetition, you strengthen the capacity to choose where attention rests. But formal meditation is just practice for the real game, which is played throughout your daily life. Can you maintain attention on what matters when distractions compete for it? Can you direct attention toward the positive aspects of a situation when negative aspects are screaming? Can you sustain attention on long-term goals when short-term impulses pull at you? These capacities develop with practice. And as they develop, your entire life transforms. Because where your attention goes, there goes your life. The paradox of acceptance. Let me introduce what might seem like a contradiction, which turns out to be a deep truth. Everything I've said so far might suggest that the path involves constantly striving to improve, to change, to become different from what you are. Visualize a better future, transmute your desires, redirect your attention, shift your consciousness. All this is true and useful, but there's another truth that must be held simultaneously, or the striving becomes counterproductive. You must also accept yourself exactly as you are, right now. This is not passive resignation. It's not abandoning the commitment to growth. It's recognizing that the growth happens not by rejecting your current self, but by embracing it fully. Here's why this matters practically. As long as you're at war with yourself, as long as you're resisting and rejecting aspects of who you are, you're in a state of inner conflict. This conflict consumes energy. It creates stress. It actually impedes the very change you're seeking. When you fully accept yourself, including your limitations and flaws, the inner war stops. The energy that was going into self-conflict becomes available for growth, and paradoxically, change becomes easier. This is visible in something as simple as physical relaxation. If you try to relax a muscle by fighting its tension, you often create more tension. But if you bring attention to the muscle, accept the tension that's there, allow it to be exactly as it is, often the muscle releases on its own. The same principle applies to psychological change. When you resist an unwanted trait, telling yourself you shouldn't be this way, getting frustrated at yourself, trying to force change through self-rejection, you often strengthen the trait. But when you bring compassionate attention to it, accepting that this is currently part of you without judging yourself harshly, change becomes possible. There's a paradox here that the rational mind has trouble grasping. Genuine acceptance is the most efficient path to change. Hamblin understood this, which is why his teaching emphasized both the commitment to growth and the recognition that the infinite power works through you exactly as you are. You don't have to become worthy before the power is available. It's available now, in this moment, to this imperfect person reading these words. The role of service. I've mentioned service several times, but let me develop this theme more fully, because Hamblin considered it absolutely central. The ego wants to accumulate. It wants more money, more recognition, more security, more pleasure. This wanting is natural. It's how the survival mechanism operates. But left unchecked, it creates a contraction, a tightening around self-interest that ultimately leads to misery. Service is the antidote. When you give attention to the needs of others, when you contribute to something larger than your individual comfort, the tight grip of ego relaxes. You experience a kind of expansion that no amount of accumulation can provide. This is not just a moral principle. It's a mechanism built into how consciousness works. Think about the times you felt most alive, most fulfilled, most like yourself. Very likely these were moments when you were giving to a person, a project, a cause. The flow state that artists and athletes describe is inherently non-self-focused. The profound connection of love requires attention to another. Conversely, the most miserable times are often when we're most absorbed in our own problems, our own wounds, our own wants. The contracted state of pure self-concern is a kind of psychological prison. Service is not primarily about being a good person, though it helps with that. It's about accessing states of consciousness that self-focus makes impossible. Now there's a trap to avoid here. Service can become another form of ego gratification if we're not careful. Serving in order to be seen as good, to accumulate spiritual merit, to feel superior to those who don't serve, this misses the point entirely. True service is given without attachment to return. You give because giving is the natural expression of abundance consciousness. You serve because service is its own reward, not because you expect something back. This doesn't mean being a doormat or allowing yourself to be exploited. You can serve while maintaining appropriate boundaries. You can give generously while also taking care of yourself. The issue is not how much you give, but the spirit in which you give. As you develop through practice, service becomes less effortful and more spontaneous. It's not something you have to make yourself do against resistant inclinations. It flows naturally from a sense of fullness. Because you have enough, you give naturally. This creates a positive feedback loop. Giving from fullness generates more fullness. Service done from the right consciousness doesn't deplete, it replenishes. Handling negative forces. Any honest teaching must address the reality of negative forces that seem to work against our development. I'm not talking about metaphysical demons, though Hamblin's era used that kind of language. I'm talking about the observable fact that when you begin conscious work on yourself, you often encounter intensified resistance. Old patterns don't want to die. The status quo has momentum. The environment you've built around your current self doesn't automatically adjust when you begin to change. This resistance takes various forms. Internal resistance might show up as increased self-doubt, sudden doubts about the whole enterprise, intense cravings for old habits, or eruptions of emotions you thought you dealt with. External resistance might appear as unexpected obstacles, conflicts with people close to you, financial pressures, or circumstances that seem specifically designed to test your commitment. Many people interpret this resistance as evidence that they're on the wrong path. They quit just when they're starting to make real progress. The more useful interpretation is that resistance is a sign that change is actually occurring. The patterns being threatened are fighting back. If there were no real change happening, there would be no resistance to it. This doesn't mean you should seek out suffering or interpret every difficulty as spiritual progress. Sometimes a difficulty is just a difficulty with no deeper meaning. Discernment is required. But when you're genuinely committed to growth, when you're doing the practices consistently, when you're maintaining awareness of your intent, then the difficulties that arise can often be understood as part of the process rather than evidence against it. The way through resistance is not around it, but through it. You don't outsmart resistance. You don't avoid it. You face it directly with as much consciousness as you can muster, and you keep going. This is why support is so important. When you're in the thick of resistance, you can't see clearly. You need external perspective from a teacher, a group, a wise friend to help you stay on track. Hamblin was part of a tradition that emphasized the importance of what they called the company of the wise. Spending time with people further along the path than yourself provides both inspiration and practical guidance through the inevitable difficult passages. The long view. As we approach the end of this exploration, let me speak about time. Our culture is obsessed with speed, fast results, quick fixes, instant transformation. This obsession is deeply hostile to genuine development. Real change takes time. There are no shortcuts. Anyone offering rapid enlightenment is peddling illusions. This is hard to hear in our accelerated age. We want transformation on demand, like streaming video. But consciousness doesn't work that way. The good news is that time is on your side. Every day of practice, however imperfect, is a deposit in an account that accumulates compound interest. The effects of sustained effort are not linear, but exponential. A little progress consistently maintained becomes enormous transformation over years. The bad news is that there's no arriving, no final destination where the work is complete. Growth is endless. The horizon retreats as you advance. There will always be more to learn, more to release, more to become. For some, this sounds exhausting. For others, it sounds exciting. Your response probably indicates something about your temperament and your readiness for this path. What I can say with confidence is that the journey itself is worth taking, regardless of where it leads. The quality of life available through developed consciousness is so different from the alternative that it justifies the effort many times over. This isn't about reaching some imagined future state of perfection. It's about experiencing life more fully right now. Even a little progress in consciousness makes colors brighter, relationships deeper, work more meaningful, and the accumulated wisdom of those who walked this path before confirms that it leads somewhere, that there are levels of realization and states of being that the untrained mind cannot imagine. These are not fantasy or wishful thinking. They're the testimony of countless practitioners across cultures and centuries. You don't have to take this on faith. The practices themselves will generate evidence. As you apply them consistently, you'll begin to experience the shifts that confirm they're doing something real. The faith that's needed is just enough to start and continue. The rest comes from direct experience. Your starting point. If you've read this far, you're clearly interested in more than intellectual understanding. You want to actually apply these principles. So let me be specific about where to start. Don't try to do everything at once. This is the most common mistake. Overwhelmed by possibilities, people try to implement 12 practices simultaneously, sustain them for a week, and then collapse back into old patterns. Start with one thing. Master it, or at least establish it firmly, before adding more. If I had to recommend a single starting practice, it would be the morning pause. Before you do anything else, before you check your phone, before you leave your bed, take 5 minutes to do nothing. Breathe, feel your body, notice the fact of your existence. Perhaps generate a moment of gratitude, that's all. This simple practice, done consistently, begins to shift everything downstream. It breaks the pattern of reactive living. It creates a gap between sleeping and doing in which consciousness can assert itself. Once this is established, once you're doing it daily without effort, ideally for several weeks, you might add the noticing practice. Throughout the day, whenever you remember, notice what state you're in. Just notice. Don't try to change it. Just see it clearly. These two practices, morning pause and noticing, are foundations on which everything else can be built. They're simple enough to be sustainable but powerful enough to create real change. From there, you might add visualization, service practice, attention training, or deeper exploration of the ideas we've discussed. But don't rush. Each layer needs time to settle before the next is added. The invitation. What I've shared with you comes from the teachings of Henry T. Hamblin, filtered through my own understanding and experience. Hamblin wrote in a different era, with different language and cultural assumptions. I've tried to translate his insights into terms that speak to contemporary life, but ultimately, these words are just pointers. The reality they point to can only be known through your own direct experience. You have within you a force that has the capacity to lift you higher than you can currently imagine. This is not metaphor. This is not wishful thinking. This is a description of a capacity that you were born with and that awaits only your attention and development. The circumstances of your life, whatever they are, do not determine what you can become. People have realized the highest states from the most unpromising starting points. Your current limitations are not your destiny, but neither will transformation happen automatically. It requires intention, practice, persistence. It requires the kind of sustained effort that our distracted culture makes increasingly difficult. The question is whether you'll make that effort, not whether you have time. You do, even if it's only minutes per day. Not whether you're capable. You are, regardless of your perceived limitations. But whether you'll choose to walk this path rather than the path of drifting unconsciousness. This is not a choice you make once and forever. It's a choice you make each morning, each moment, again and again. The invitation is always open. The possibility is always present. May you find the courage to accept this invitation. May you discover the force that has always been within you. And may your life become what it was always meant to be, a full expression of the infinite through the finite, a contribution to the awakening of the world, an adventure worthy of your singular existence. The journey begins now. It begins exactly where you are, with exactly what you have, in exactly this moment. There is nowhere else to start and nothing more you need. What will you do with your one precious life? The depth of daily life. Now, I want to turn our attention somewhere unexpected, to the ordinary moments that make up most of our existence. Spiritual teaching often focuses on peak experiences, altered states, dramatic breakthroughs. And these have their place, but Hamblin understood that the real work happens in the mundane. How do you approach the dishes in the sink? What quality of attention do you bring to your commute? How present are you during the thousands of small interactions that constitute daily life? These questions matter enormously because daily life is where you actually live. Peak experiences are rare punctuation marks. The sentence is made of ordinary words. There's a Zen teaching that after enlightenment, you chop wood and carry water. The tasks don't change, but the consciousness with which you approach them transforms everything. Consider washing dishes. Normally, this is an obstacle between you and whatever you'd rather be doing. Your mind is somewhere else, rehearsing future conversations, replaying past events, planning, worrying, fantasizing. Your body goes through the motions while you are mentally absent. But what if you brought full presence to the activity? What if you felt the temperature of the water, noticed the iridescence of soap bubbles, attended to the transformation of dirty to clean? What if washing dishes became an opportunity for consciousness rather than an interruption of it? This sounds trivial. It might even sound pointless. What difference does it make how you wash dishes? The difference is everything, because how you do anything is how you do everything. The consciousness you bring to trivial activities is the same consciousness you bring to important ones. If you can't be present for dishes, you can't really be present for life. Moreover, the mundane is where most of your time goes. If spiritual development only happens during formal practice sessions, you're leaving 95% of your life unattended. But if every activity becomes an opportunity for presence, suddenly you're practicing all day long. This is what Hamblin meant when he spoke of maintaining consciousness in the midst of activity, not retreating from life into meditation caves, but bringing meditative awareness to ordinary existence. The practical approach is to select one routine activity as a practice ground. It could be washing dishes, taking a shower, walking between locations, eating meals, any regular activity that doesn't require complex thought. During this activity, commit to full presence. When you notice your mind has wandered, gently return attention to the sensory reality of what you're doing. No judgment about the wandering, no trying to force concentration, just noticing and returning. Over time, presence during this activity becomes natural. Then you can expand to other activities. Gradually, more and more of daily life becomes infused with awareness rather than occurring on automatic pilot. This practice might sound like a small thing compared to the grand ideas we've been discussing, but it's actually the integration of those ideas into lived reality. Without this mundane application, spiritual concepts remain abstractions that don't transform anything. The quality of relationships. Another area where theory must become practice is in how we relate to other people. Hamblin taught that our relationships are mirrors, reflecting back to us our own consciousness. The conflicts we have with others often point to conflicts within ourselves. The qualities that irritate us in other people are frequently qualities we haven't come to terms with in our own nature. This is a hard teaching to accept. It's much easier to believe that the difficult people in our lives are simply wrong, bad, or unfortunate impositions on our otherwise pleasant existence. But consider, why does a particular trait in another person trigger you? Why does one person's behavior provoke intense reaction while another's barely registers? The trigger isn't just about them, it's about something in you that their behavior activates. This doesn't mean you're to blame for other people's bad behavior. It doesn't mean abusers should be tolerated or that all conflict is really self-conflict in disguise. Some people actually are behaving badly, and appropriate responses range from boundary setting to removal. But it does mean that your reactions to others, the intensity, the persistence, the specific flavor of your emotional responses, tell you something about yourself that's worth examining. When you find yourself repeatedly disturbed by a certain type of person or behavior, that's information. Rather than just getting annoyed again and again, you might ask, what is this reaction showing me? What unresolved material in myself is being activated? What would it mean to come to peace with this trigger, not by suppressing it, but by understanding its roots? This kind of inquiry transforms relationships from sources of irritation to opportunities for self-knowledge. There's another dimension to relationships in the context of consciousness development, the quality of presence you bring to your interactions. Most conversations happen between people who are only partially there. Each person is mentally rehearsing their next comment, worrying about how they're being perceived, or simply drifting in private daydream. Genuine contact is rare, but what if you entered interactions with full presence? What if you actually saw the person in front of you, actually heard what they were saying, actually offered them the gift of your complete attention? This alone, without any special technique or spiritual prowess, transforms relationships. People feel it when they're being truly seen. It's so uncommon that it registers as remarkable. And your own experience of the interaction shifts. You're actually there rather than going through social motions on autopilot. The practice is simple, though not easy. When you're with another person, be with them, not thinking about yourself, not planning what you'll say next, not judging their performance, just being present to another human being. This presence is the greatest gift you can give someone. It's also powerful practice for developing the consciousness we've been discussing. Each interaction becomes an opportunity for presence. Money and spirituality. Few topics generate more confusion in spiritual circles than money. Some teachings suggest that material abundance flows automatically to those with right consciousness. Others imply that desiring wealth is itself a spiritual failing. Both extremes miss the mark. Hamblin, as a businessman who experienced both prosperity and ruin, had a nuanced view. He was clear that using spiritual powers to manifest money for its own sake is a misuse that leads to disaster. He was equally clear that poverty is not virtuous and that adequate material resources are part of a well-functioning life. The key distinction is between wealth pursued from scarcity and wealth received as a byproduct of service. When you chase money because you feel you don't have enough, because you're afraid of lack, because you want wealth to prove your worth, you're operating from scarcity consciousness. This consciousness typically undermines the very wealth it seeks. Even if you achieve material success through this approach, it won't satisfy because the internal sense of lack persists regardless of external accumulation. When you focus on contribution, on creating genuine value, serving real needs, improving lives, and allow fair compensation to flow from that contribution, you're operating from abundance consciousness. The money that comes through this channel doesn't carry the burden of scarcity. It can be received freely and used wisely without desperate clinging or hollow accumulation. Practically speaking, this means several things. First, don't use visualization or affirmation to try to manifest money directly. Instead, visualize yourself contributing value, solving problems, serving needs. Let the money be a natural consequence rather than the primary focus. Second, examine your relationship to money honestly. What fears drive your financial behavior? What would you do differently if you trusted that your needs would be met? Where are you hoarding out of scarcity rather than giving from fullness? Third, practice generosity proportionate to your means. This doesn't mean giving away everything. That would be irresponsible if you have obligations. But it does mean cultivating the habit of giving, which keeps the flow of abundance moving rather than stagnating. Fourth, do excellent work. This is so basic that it's often overlooked in spiritual discussions, but the universe rewards value creation. If you want more material resources, become more valuable to others. Develop skills, solve bigger problems, serve more people. This is not worldly advice in tension with spiritual principles. It's the practical expression of those principles in the material realm. The goal is neither attachment to wealth nor aversion to it. It's a healthy relationship where money serves life rather than driving it, where enough is truly enough, and where generosity flows naturally from the recognition that you've never been separate from the source of all abundance. When things fall apart, I've spoken about growth, about increasing capacity, about progressive development, but what about those times when everything seems to collapse? When your health fails, your relationship ends, your business crumbles, your faith itself comes into question? These crisis points are part of the path, not detours from it. Hamblin himself went through periods of complete breakdown. His health collapsed. His business failed. Everything he'd built fell apart. From these crucibles, he emerged with deeper understanding than prosperity had ever given him. The dark night of the soul, as mystics call it, is not a mistake. It's an intensification of the transformative process. The structures of identity that normally protect the ego become too constricting. They have to break for something larger to emerge. This doesn't mean seeking out crisis or interpreting every difficulty as spiritual opportunity. Sometimes suffering is just suffering, with no hidden gift. Discernment is required. But when genuine breakdown comes, when the foundations you've built your life on crumble, it helps to know that others have passed through similar territory and emerged transformed. What helps during these times? First, surrender. Not resignation, not giving up, but releasing the desperate grip on how things were supposed to be. You may not be able to control what's happening, but you can release the exhausting struggle against it. Second, reach out. Crisis is not the time for spiritual heroism. You need support, practical, emotional, perhaps professional. Let yourself receive help. Third, take care of basics. When everything is falling apart, focus on getting through each day. Eat, sleep, move your body. Don't demand of yourself the consciousness work that normal times allow. Just survive with as much grace as possible. Fourth, hold on to the long view. Crises feel permanent in the midst of them. They're not. Everything changes. This too shall pass. Not a platitude, but a truth that can be anchored to when the storm is raging. Fifth, look for the lesson eventually, not immediately. During acute crisis, this kind of reflection is often impossible and inappropriate. But when some stability returns, ask, what has this experience shown me? What needed to die so that something new could be born? What am I being invited to release or develop? From this perspective, even the most devastating experiences become grist for the mill of transformation. Nothing is wasted. Everything is used. The community of seekers, I've emphasized individual practice throughout this teaching, and that emphasis is appropriate. No one else can do your inner work for you. The path is ultimately walked alone. But there's another truth that balances this. Genuine development rarely happens in isolation. The company of others who are consciously working on themselves accelerates your own growth. It provides mirrors, support, challenge, inspiration. It counters the subtle drift back to unconsciousness that solitary practice makes likely. This is why every tradition emphasizes sangha, community, fellowship. Not because group membership saves you, it doesn't, but because the group provides conditions that make individual transformation more likely. What does this look like practically? It might mean finding or forming a group dedicated to consciousness work. This could be centered on a particular practice tradition, a book study, a shared commitment to growth. The form matters less than the function. Regular contact with others who take inner development seriously. It might mean working with a teacher, someone further along the path who can guide, instruct, and hold you accountable. Not all teachers are legitimate, and discernment is essential. But the right teacher at the right time can make possible what would otherwise take decades or never happen at all. It might mean cultivating friendships with people who share your values around growth. Not every friend needs to be a spiritual seeker, but having some relationships where you can speak honestly about your inner life, where personal development is a natural topic of conversation, provides support that's hard to replace. The specific form depends on your circumstances and temperament. Some people thrive in organized groups with regular meetings and structured practices. Others prefer loose networks of like-minded individuals. Still others find their community primarily through books and teachers at a distance, with perhaps one or two close relationships providing direct support. What doesn't work well is complete isolation. The lone wolf approach might feel spiritually impressive, but it's vulnerable to self-deception and stagnation. The feedback that comes from genuine relationship is irreplaceable. Integration and wholeness. As we near the end of this teaching, I want to address the relationship between spiritual development and the rest of life. There's a tendency in some circles to split existence into spiritual and worldly domains, valuing the former and dismissing the latter. This split is itself a problem. True development is integration, not escape. It's about becoming whole, not about rejecting parts of yourself to cultivate others. This means your spiritual practice should make you better at ordinary life, not worse. Better at your work, not checked out from it. Better in your relationships, not using spirituality as an excuse to avoid intimacy. Better in your body, not treating it as an obstacle to transcendence. If your consciousness work is making you less functional in the world, something has gone wrong. You may be avoiding life in the name of spiritual development. You may be using spiritual concepts to bypass psychological work that needs to be done. You may have constructed a spiritual ego that's as problematic as the mundane ego it replaced. Hamblin was emphatic on this point. He was a businessman, a family man, a participant in ordinary society. His spiritual teaching was never about escaping from life, but about living it more fully. This integration happens gradually. It's not accomplished by forcing yourself to be spiritual while doing worldly things. It's the natural result of sustained practice that transforms your consciousness at depth. As the transformation proceeds, the split between spiritual and worldly begins to heal. You stop having a spiritual life and an ordinary life. You have one life, approached with the consciousness developed through practice. The sacred and mundane merge. This is the goal, not some altered state achieved in meditation caves, but an integrated wholeness that expresses itself in how you wash dishes, how you do your job, how you treat strangers, how you face difficulty, how you love. The teaching beyond words. Everything I've written here is a finger pointing at the moon. The words are not the thing itself. They're signposts, hints, suggestions that might point you toward direct discovery. At some point, you'll need to stop reading about these things and start living them. The concepts will reach the limit of their usefulness. What comes next can only be known through your own unmediated experience. This isn't anti-intellectual. Understanding has its place. The concepts we've explored can organize your approach, answer questions, resolve confusions. They're valuable and not to be dismissed, but they're also not the main event. The main event is you, sitting in your room, breathing, noticing, choosing where to place your attention. The main event is you facing the ordinary challenges of your ordinary day with whatever degree of presence and wisdom you've managed to cultivate. The main event is your direct encounter with what is, unmediated by anyone's interpretations, including mine. Hamblin wrote books and gave talks, but he always insisted that the teaching was within each reader. He wasn't trying to impose his understanding, but to awaken the understanding already latent in those he reached. In that spirit, let me suggest that everything you've read here, you already knew at some level. I haven't given you anything new. I've reminded you of what you've always been and what's always been available. The force buried within you isn't something to be added. It's already there, already operational, already shaping your life. The question is whether you'll become conscious of it, learn to work with it, align yourself with its purpose. That alignment isn't achieved by acquiring new beliefs or performing special practices. It's revealed by removing what obscures it. The barriers of fear, the layers of conditioning, the tangles of misdirected desire. As these are seen through and released, what remains is what was always present. You don't become a new person. You become more fully what you always were beneath the accumulations of a lifetime. This is why the work can feel like loss as much as gain. You're not adding, but subtracting. Not building, but unveiling. Not becoming something else, but finally being yourself. A final word. The path I've described is not the only path. There are many ways up the mountain, and the one that's right for you depends on factors no teaching can account for. Trust your own sense of resonance. What calls to you? What quickens when you encounter it? Follow that. The path I've described is also not a complete path. In these pages, I've offered what seemed most essential and practical, but there's far more to explore. Hamblin himself wrote many books, each addressing different aspects of the teaching. And beyond Hamblin, there's an ocean of wisdom from every tradition and every era awaiting your exploration. But don't let the vastness paralyze you. Start somewhere. Start with the simplest practice, the morning pause, the noticing, the present moment attention to ordinary activity. Let your engagement with these simple things lead where it leads. The universe is more friendly than it appears. The challenges you face, however difficult, are within your capacity to meet. The transformation you seek, however distant it seems, is closer than your next breath. You are not alone in this work. Countless beings have walked this path before you. The wisdom they gained is available to guide you. The force they awakened is the same force within you. You're part of a vast movement of consciousness toward its own realization. Not a lonely atom struggling in void, but a cell in a living body, sustained and supported by what contains you. May you find the courage to begin. May you find the persistence to continue. May you find the grace to receive what practice reveals. And may your life become a blessing to yourself, to those you touch, and to the world that needs what you have to give. The hidden force is not hidden from you now. It's awake in these very words, in the recognition they spark, in the possibilities they unveil. What will you do with what you've glimpsed? The answer is not in any book. It's in your next moment, your next choice, your next breath. Begin. The texture of patience. There is something I have yet to address adequately, the quality of patience and what it actually feels like to walk this path over time. Most teachings present transformation as either instantaneous awakening or steady linear progress. Neither accurately describes the experience. The reality is messier. There are periods when nothing seems to be happening despite consistent practice. There are sudden leaps followed by what feel like slides backward. There are plateaus that stretch on so long you forget you're on a path at all. This irregularity is not a bug, but a feature of genuine development. Growth happens in cycles, and the cycles are not always visible from inside them. What does this mean practically? It means you cannot judge your progress by how you feel day to day, or even month to month. There will be times when practice feels alive and productive. There will be times when it feels hollow and mechanical. Neither experience accurately indicates what's happening at depth. The subconscious mind, which is doing much of the heavy lifting in this work, doesn't operate on the timescales of conscious awareness. Changes are being prepared that won't surface for weeks or months. Seeds are germinating in darkness before they break through the soil. Your job is to keep showing up regardless of apparent results, to practice when it feels meaningful and when it doesn't, to maintain commitment through the long stretches where nothing seems to change. This is not the same as mindless repetition or stubborn refusal to adapt. You should absolutely adjust your approach if it's clearly not working, but the determination of not working must be made over long timescales, not based on daily or weekly fluctuations. The image that serves here is of farmers. They plant in one season and harvest in another. The growth happens invisibly, underground, and then slowly above. The farmer doesn't dig up seeds to check if they're growing. They trust the process while continuing to tend the conditions. Your practice is the tending. The growth happens on its own schedule. Your patience is an expression of faith, not faith in some dogma, but faith in the reality of a process you can't fully see or control. There's a sweetness to this patience that's hard to describe. When you stop demanding immediate results, when you relax into the long arc of development, something in you unclenches. The striving quality that so often accompanies spiritual seeking releases. You're not trying to get somewhere else. You're doing what's to be done today and letting that be enough. This patience is not passive. You're still fully engaged, still practicing with focus and intention. But the desperate energy of needing things to be different has dissolved. You're at peace with where you are, even as you continue to grow. The experience of flow. Something begins to happen as practice deepens. It's difficult to name but unmistakable when experienced. You start to notice that life has a kind of flow to it. Events connect in ways that seem meaningful. Needed resources appear at the right moment. People you need to meet cross your path. Information arrives just when you're ready for it. From the outside, these occurrences might be dismissed as coincidence or confirmation bias. From the inside, they feel like something else, like participation in an intelligence larger than your individual mind. Hamblin called this being in harmony with the universe. Modern language might speak of synchronicity or flow states or alignment. The terminology matters less than the experience. What's happening, as near as I can describe it, is that your individual consciousness has come into resonance with the larger patterns of existence. You're no longer fighting against the way things want to move. You're moving with them. This doesn't mean everything goes your way. Flow doesn't equal comfort, but even difficulty has a different quality when you're in flow. It feels meaningful rather than arbitrary. You sense that challenges are there to develop something in you rather than to punish you. Even painful events carry a rightness that pure suffering lacks. The experience of flow confirms something that intellectual understanding alone cannot prove, that the universe is not random mechanism indifferent to your existence, but an intelligent wholeness in which you participate and which participates in you. I'm not asking you to believe this philosophically. I'm telling you that if you do the work, you'll experience it directly. And once you experience it, no one's skepticism will shake your knowing. This knowing is not dogmatic certainty. It's not, I've figured out how reality works. It's more like recognizing a face you've always known. Oh, it's like that. Of course, this deep recognition is beyond argument because it's not an argument. It's a seeing. The surrender of ambition. Earlier, I spoke about the paradox that goals pursued from fullness are more likely to be achieved than goals chased from desperation. Let me develop this further. As practice deepens, something happens to the whole relationship with ambition and achievement. In the early stages, many people approach this work with goals in mind. They want success, or healing, or happiness, or spiritual attainment. The practices are tools to get what they want. There's nothing wrong with this. It's a natural entry point and can provide motivation when motivation is needed. But if practice is genuine and sustained, the relationship to these goals changes. You begin to notice that achievement doesn't satisfy the way you imagine. You reach goals and find yourself strangely unchanged. The happiness you expected doesn't arrive or doesn't stay. The success doesn't fill the hole it was supposed to fill. This can be disillusioning, but it's actually progress. You're learning through direct experience what the teachings point to, that no external attainment can provide what only internal transformation offers. Simultaneously, you begin to experience moments of fullness that don't depend on any achievement. Maybe during practice, maybe during ordinary moments of presence, you touch a satisfaction that's unconditional. It's not because of anything. It's just there, a baseline okayness with existence itself. As this unconditional satisfaction becomes more accessible, the feverish pursuit of goals begins to relax. Not because you've given up or lost motivation, but because the underlying desperation that drove much of your striving has dissolved. You may still pursue goals. You may even pursue them more effectively now that fear isn't clouding your judgment. But the quality is different. You're playing the game of life fully while knowing it's a game. You want to win but don't need to win. The outcome affects what happens next but doesn't determine your fundamental well-being. This is freedom. Not freedom from circumstances, which is impossible, but freedom within circumstances. The liberation that comes from no longer requiring reality to be different from what it is before you can be at peace. Paradoxically, this freedom often leads to greater worldly effectiveness. When you're not afraid of failure, you take intelligent risks that fearful people avoid. When you're not attached to specific outcomes, you can respond flexibly to what actually emerges rather than rigidly forcing your agenda. When you're sourced from within rather than dependent on external validation, you have a stability that attracts others and sustains effort through difficulty. The emergence of compassion. Another change that comes with deepening practice is an expansion of concern beyond yourself. This is not self-sacrificing martyrdom or abstract love for humanity. It's a natural widening of the circle of care as the boundaries of the isolated self become more permeable. You begin to feel the suffering of others as continuous with your own, not in a way that's overwhelmed or depleted by the world's pain, but in a way that spontaneously wishes for their freedom as you wish for your own. This compassion is not a duty imposed from outside. It's not the product of moral reasoning that concludes you should care about others. It emerges organically from the recognition that the boundaries between selves are less solid than they appear. At a certain depth of seeing, the distinction between my suffering and your suffering begins to blur. We are different expressions of the same consciousness. Your pain is, in some real sense, pain that's happening to the whole of which I'm part. From this recognition, the impulse to serve arises naturally, not serving to earn spiritual merit or look virtuous, but serving because it's the natural expression of understanding. When you see that we're not separate, helping you is not altruism. It's simply what makes sense. This evolution of motivation often happens gradually and subtly. You might not notice it until you catch yourself doing something kind without calculation, caring about strangers without conscious choice. The compassion has become part of who you are rather than something you perform. There's also a deepening of compassion toward yourself. Many people on the spiritual path are ruthlessly hard on themselves, judging their failures, measuring their progress against ideals, berating themselves for not being further along. As practice matures, this inner harshness often softens. You see that the part of you that judges is itself suffering from its own distortions. You develop tenderness toward your own struggles, the same tenderness you'd feel toward anyone caught in difficulty. This self-compassion is not self-indulgence. It doesn't mean letting yourself off the hook or abandoning standards. It means holding yourself with the same kindness you'd extend to a beloved friend. It means recognizing that you're doing your best with the consciousness you currently have, while also continuing to develop that consciousness. The union of self-compassion and compassion for others is not a coincidence. They arise from the same seeing. As the hardness of self-judgment softens, the heart opens generally. As the heart opens, the false distinction between self and other becomes less convincing. The ordinariness of awakening. I want to say something about what the destination looks like, though calling it a destination is misleading since the path has no end. People often imagine spiritual advancement as dramatic and otherworldly. Visions, powers, unimaginable bliss, radical discontinuity from ordinary consciousness. Sometimes dramatic experiences do occur, but they're not the point and they're not reliable indicators of development. Someone can have spectacular experiences and remain narcissistic and unkind. Someone can progress enormously with nothing particularly dramatic occurring. The real signs of development are much more ordinary, greater equanimity, not being so knocked around by events, more patience with yourself, with others, with the pace of life, increased capacity to be present, actually being where you are rather than lost in mental activity, spontaneous kindness, caring for others without calculation, resilience, the ability to face difficulty without being destroyed by it, humor, the lightness that comes from not taking the self-project so seriously. These qualities don't look mystical. They look like a good person, an effective person, a happy person. They're what the teachings were always pointing toward, not special experiences, but transformed character. The Zen saying captures it. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The activities don't change. The consciousness with which they're approached transforms everything. What's peculiar about this ordinariness is that it's extraordinarily rare. Almost everyone you meet is caught in compulsive mental activity, driven by fears they don't understand, reactive to triggers they've never examined, identified with a self-image they've never questioned. The ordinary person, in the sense of genuinely present and awake, is the rarest person. This means that your development, however modest it seems, is significant. Every increment of consciousness you gain ripples outward through your interactions. Every degree of freedom you achieve affects the field that contains all of us. You don't need to become a saint or a famous teacher for your growth to matter. It matters in every conversation, every encounter, every choice. The world is transformed by transformed individuals living ordinary lives with extraordinary awareness. The continuing invitation I've written at length, and still I've only sketched the outlines. The territory is vast, and each practitioner must explore it personally. What I hope I've conveyed is this. There is a hidden force within you, and it is possible to know and work with this force. The path to that knowing involves practices that are simple but not easy. The journey takes time and patience. The results are less dramatic than often imagined, but more valuable than dramatic experiences. The force Hamblin wrote about is not metaphor or wishful thinking. It's a real capacity, as real as your capacity to think or feel. It's dormant in most people, active in a few, fully awakened in fewer still, but it's available to everyone. No one is excluded by their past, their personality, or their circumstances. The invitation remains open. It was open before you read these words, and it's open now. It will be open tomorrow and next year and for the rest of your life. You can accept it whenever you're ready. When you do accept, you join a lineage that stretches back thousands of years. Every human who has recognized the mystery they are and committed to its exploration. You're not alone on this path. You never were. The company of seekers, visible and invisible, accompanies you, and you bring something unique to the path, the particular expression of consciousness that is you, with your specific gifts and limitations, your particular karma, your unrepeatable vantage on existence. Your awakening will not look like anyone else's, because you are not anyone else. This uniqueness is not a problem to be solved, but a contribution to be offered. The whole needs your particular flavor of realization. The symphony requires your specific note, so bring everything you are to this work. Don't try to be someone else on the path. Don't compare your progress to others. Walk your walk with all its stumbles and detours, trusting that it leads where it needs to lead. The hidden force is stirring. It stirs in these words, in your reading of them, in the recognition they evoke. Something in you already knows what I've been trying to say. Something is already awake enough to recognize the truth being pointed to. Trust that knowing. Follow that recognition. Let it lead you deeper into the mystery of what you are. The journey continues. Each moment is a beginning. The invitation never expires.